Lord Adonis, bit of a big wig. He's from a different side of the Labour family than me, but this channel is about chatting to people I don't necessarily agree on with everything. Now, he's got a lot to say on the scandal of privatised rail, and also on the biggie we'll be talking about forever, Brexit. This was filmed a few weeks ago, so a few things have changed, not least of all my haircut, Nigel Farage, second referendum and all that. We wanted to film it in St Pancras, but you know, the authorities stopped us. Put your tinfoil hats on. So instead we did it in the German Gymnasium, here in the environs of King's Cross, St Pancras. I think this was a very interesting discussion. So you're now the unofficial head of the Chris Grayling fan club, aren't you?
I tweet my undying adoration of him almost
adulation.
hourly at the
You're
moment.
a sycophant towards Chris Grayling. Like, you had some beef with Chris Grayling, I think it's fair to say. What is it, the scandal that you've exposed? What is it?
Two private companies, Virgin and Stagecoach, were due to pay $3.3 billion to the taxpayer for running the East Coast Mainline service, which goes from King's Cross through to York and up to Edinburgh and Aberdeen. They overbid for the contract. The whole point about bidding is supposed to be that the private sector takes on risk. They went cap in hand to Chris Grayling and said, we've overbid and we would like to renegotiate the contract. What Grayling should have said to Branson and Souter when they came cap in hand was, if you walk away from this contract, I'm going to set up a state company. Why would he not do that? Because he thought that would be giving a political point to Jeremy Corbyn. Well, actually, his job is to defend the taxpayer. This isn't a right-wing or a left-wing thing. This is doing his job.
So you're saying for party political reasons, bringing it under public ownership, that would have effectively legitimised Labour's argument. So that's
my contention. And indeed, it's common knowledge inside the Transport Department that when Grayling went in there as Secretary of State, he said he wanted the big dividing line with Labour to be nationalisation. You cannot justify, no one, not even a right-wing Tory, can justify the Brian Souters and the Richard Bransons being in the rail industry so that we, the taxpayer, can gift them billions of pounds.
This is socialism for the rich, sure.
Well, the tragedy is that everyone loses because, of course, the poor lose because there's less money to spend on welfare, which is an important priority, but also rail users lose. The reason why they have to pay these huge fare increases is because the industry is being mismanaged. And the tragedy of what's happening is if you're going to take hundreds of millions or billions out of the industry to give it to Richard Branson and Brian Souter, then not only is there less money for other public priorities, but there's also less money for investment in the rail industry itself. And that, I think, is going to set the country back decades. What, in fact, Chris Grayling has done is more to advance the cause of nationalisation in the railways than Jeremy Corbyn and Karl Marx combined. Because what he's showing is that the private sector cannot justify its own existence on its own terms, which is that it's highly competitive, it offers better value for money than the public sector, and it offers more choice. So it's not doing those things, then why have it?
Comrade Chris Grayling, wasting public money at a time of severe cuts, which have caused huge pain for people across the country and damaged our services, is scandalous. Should there be an inquiry into why?
Yes, well, I'm hoping that the Public Accounts Committee, whose job is to look after the public purse, advised by the National Audit Office, who are the state auditors, I hope that they're going to be in there looking at this quite quickly. I think Grayling is going to find it increasingly difficult to sustain this bailout.
So do you think he'll have to resign, or should he resign?
Well, I've said that I don't think it's going to be possible for him to continue when the full facts come out. You know, we're talking about hundreds of millions of public money just in this East Coast contract. He'll have to offer similar terms to all of the private companies, and the cost of that could run into billions.
Now, Brexit. Do you have any strong opinions on Brexit? Either way.
Yeah, well,
and you're a bit of a fence sitter, aren't you, when it comes to?
Yeah, well, I have a very moderate and straightforward view on Brexit, which is it's a bad idea. The big issue now, which is a fundamental issue that's going to dominate British politics for the next 15 months, are what are the terms on which we're going to leave, and are those terms acceptable to the British people? Irrespective of whether you were for or against 2 years ago, the terms on which we leave are crucial. And when we see what those terms are, my view, which is as a Democrat, is that the British people should then decide on those terms.
It's been posed as a referendum on the deal. But really, you just want to stay in the European Union. No, but on that, just quickly, the view then would be that the establishment, as they see it, keeps holding referendums until they get the right result. And what would that do to faith in democracy?
I don't think faith in democracy is damaged by holding another referendum.
Even if it's really driven by an attempt to overturn the first.
It's very hard to argue that the problem of a lack of democracy is more democracy. What we're saying is that in this issue, because the issue is so big, the people should decide on the terms. The whole argument 2 years ago was that we'd be better off leaving the European Union. There's almost nobody who voted to leave the European Union who voted thinking we're going to be worse off. Now, the big test, which is absolutely right that the British people should be the judge on, is are are the terms on which we're going to leave? Do they credibly offer a better deal than staying in the European Union? Now, we couldn't know that 2 years ago because what we had was a load of promises from the people who wanted to leave that it would be better, and people, a narrow majority went along with that, but there was no deal on the table. What we will have at the end of this year, when Theresa May has had by then the best part of a year and a half's worth of negotiations, is we will be able to see the deal. The amendment passed before Christmas of the meaningful final vote isn't a meaningful vote because there's no way that Parliament in practice, in my view, could vote against the terms and therefore against leaving, having had a referendum 18 months before. The only people who can make that decision are the people themselves.
You say to me, how can you possibly argue, Owen, that having another referendum is undemocratic? We're giving yet another say to the people. Then what do you say then if Remain won by 52% and then Farage and everybody else said, well, then we'll have to have another referendum? Because you've just made the point, well, there's nothing undemocratic about it. Is it best of three? And is it best of five? Are we going to have referendums forever?
I don't think that there's going to be much appetite among the British people for another referendum after we've finally decided what we're doing, whether we're leaving or staying.
There will be amongst many of those 48% of people who think that this is stolen from them by a ruse.
There'll be a load of desperados, and there'll be about a third of the Conservative Party, which, let's be clear, has taken leave of its senses in a kind of nationalist frenzy over all this. If they spend the next 20 years obsessing about Europe in the way they have done in the last 20 years, there's nothing more likely to lead to a perpetual Labour government over that time.
Have you spoken to Jeremy Corbyn about Brexit?
Do you know, though I knew Jeremy well when I lived in Islington, because he was my MP and we used to discuss schools, and we opened one of the special schools in Islington together. Since he became leader of the Labour Party, I haven't spoken to him at all.
What do you think of him?
I think he's done a phenomenal job of putting Labour back on the map. It's not an open secret I don't agree with him on everything.
What don't you agree with him on?
But I don't think that the state is the answer to everything. I'll be quite frank. My own view, I believe in what we used to call...
He was asked whether we should nationalise Wetherspoons by some young Labour activists, and he said no, so...
Oh, that's good. I understand. The only route to a better society is not only through a party, but through a movement. And Labour isn't just a party. It doesn't just spout ideas and act as a debating club. It is a social movement. And it's a social movement within working Britain. And that's what we've got to mobilise against Brexit, but also for what I hope will be the next Attlee government.
Would you serve as a minister under Jeremy Corbyn's premiership?
If there was a Labour government formed by Jeremy Corbyn, I would definitely serve.
What would you want to be?
I want to be Transport Secretary to reverse all of this nonsense on the railways, so I could then get HS2 opened 2 years earlier than they're proposing at the moment. We get Crossrail of the North set up, so we link all those northern cities in a way that we need to do desperately if we're going to revive the northern economy. You get the Midlands hub done so that when the new HS2 station is opened in Birmingham, that becomes literally the centre of the country in terms of logistics and transport. I'm going to have a great time.
2 or 3 things on Brexit. Firstly, I do think the strategy of Remain during the referendum was disastrous. It looked like an establishment status quo campaign, which didn't take into account how angry people are.
I agree with that completely. We absolutely don't want to go into the next referendum campaign with a Tory Prime Minister telling us that what we should be doing.
With a load of corporate ties and so on. But I do think the problem now is in the kind of Stop Brexit unofficial movement which exists. You've got Tony Blair. I know he's one of your heroes, certainly not for the rest of the country. Polling suggests he's one of the most unpopular individuals, let alone...
I don't think Tony should be leading this.
No, but he keeps coming out over... I mean, is Nigel Farage paying him to do it? I mean, amongst Remainers, let alone Leavers, he's exceptionally unpopular because of the Iraq War and working for dictators. Nick Clegg, somebody who's very unpopular because of tuition fees and the coalition.
Also yesterday's man,
but
I agree with
then, do you not think it backfires? Because I think there's a systematic failure to understand the sorts of people I grew up with who voted to leave the European Union, because I don't think that's going to work at all.
Well, do you know who I hope are the 2 people who lead the campaign to stay in the European Union next year? Jeremy Corbyn and Ruth Davidson. The most popular Tory out there, and the Labour leader who has, I mean, let's be frank, a cult following amongst the young, and certainly given that he has not been in any way ideological about this issue of Europe in the last in the last generation. Has been entirely pragmatic. I think if he says, as I believe he will, that the right thing is for us to stay, I think people will take that view very seriously. So I can see a way to us winning this referendum. Do you know who I hope is leading the campaign on the other side? My good friend Nigel Farage. Because this idea that Nigel is somehow the anti-elite leader, he has got away with that one at all. He is the establishment now.
Ex-City broker, Dulwich College.
The idea that Nigel Farage is an anti-elite leader.
I agree with you.
Dulwich College, stockbroker, living in whatever it is, a £4 million house and all that, is for the birds. The difference this time is that now he is the establishment. Let's be clear, Nigel Farage is in effect Prime Minister at the moment, because the people that Theresa May could not move in her reshuffle were the Brexiteers. They were untouchable, because she would have faced a civil war inside her party if she tried to move Liam Fox, David Davis, even our good friend Chris Grayling. The reason he is inviolate is because he's a radical Brexiteer. Justine Greening, who's pragmatic on Europe, she can be sacked because she doesn't count, but the Brexiteers can't be. Meanwhile, where was Nigel Farage? He was in Brussels meeting Monsieur Barnier. So he is now the establishment. He is in effect Prime Minister. He now needs to defend this treaty of leaving the European Union as the new establishment. I've missed one key player though in this referendum campaign, Owen. You.
Oh no!
When it comes to the campaign to stay in the European Union on behalf of the working people of Britain and particularly the young, Owen Jones.
I'm not so young anymore. It's
you're still, they all think you're young. They all think you're young.
It's a con.
It may be a con, but it's not quite as big a lie as the Nigel Farage lie. I'm sure you are closer to being young than he is closer to being a member of the working class in the North.
I'm still a millennial.
So alongside Jeremy and Ruth Davidson, there will need to be Owen Jones, and you will mobilise the under 35s. They will come out as never before. Everywhere I go, I speak at a lot of university meetings at the moment. They tell me, do you know that Owen Jones and what we could do to get him to come and speak here?
Stop trying to flatter me.
And I tell you why,
no, look,
because there's nothing that the young want more than to be European. They do not want to be cast into the mid-Atlantic pretending that we're in a love affair with Donald Trump. That is not the future of this country, and there's no one better than you to tell them.
Well, that's not true. But if there was another referendum, I would, campaign for Remain, as I did last time. I just don't quite see the route there. But just finally, do you genuinely think another referendum would do anything other than leave this country with even more bitter divisions than already? Because I'd say that campaign would be infinitely more bitter than the last one.
Look, let's be clear, it is going to be bitter. I mean, amazingly, I can't believe it. In my first time I've been seriously engaged in politics, which is 15 or so years now. For the first time, I'm receiving regular death threats. You know, I get people who send me pictures of gibbets and things like that, which has never happened before. So let's be clear.
I've had the same as well.
Yeah, forces have been unleashed which are very, very ugly, and none of us want to see them. No. And this is Britain. You know, this sort of thing doesn't happen in Britain. It may happen in Russia. It's not supposed to happen here. So I don't relish the prospect of another referendum at all, but I do think that the job of leaders and people who play a part in politics is to offer their best advice and leadership. My best view of the situation is that it would be, for the national interest, a profound mistake for us to leave the European Union. Facing this issue, which is the biggest issue facing our generation, facing that fairly and squarely is going to be a much better thing to do than pretending it doesn't exist and trying to move on. Because do you know what will happen if we do that? What I think will happen is quite quickly a great campaign will start for coming back in again, because people say they weren't consulted on this terrible deal on which they led, and it's in particular going to be led by the young. And I reckon what will happen is, far from ending this as an issue, I reckon it's going to be only a year or two before the great campaign starts for us to rejoin the European Union. And do you know, I suspect that one Owen Jones might be the head of it.
So that's Lord A, or Andrew, as he prefers to be called, Andy. I don't know how informed I can get with him. That was really interesting, lots of food for thought. We don't agree on everything, but it's important to have those sorts of dialogue. I think you'd all agree. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so do leave your comments. We'll be getting back to comments videos. It's been a long few months. I haven't managed to be on top of that as I should be. But we've got loads of videos. You can click on them there, because Adam's done his video stuff. And we've got loads of interviews to come. Please leave your suggestions. We'd love to hear them. As ever, subscribe. I'll see you next time.